Ooh, sounds so official, right? Um, good morning, everybody. So we're going to talk about the updated forms, and we're going to watch the video together that was put out a couple of weeks ago. I've watched it twice now. It was put out by the Texas Realtors Association. It's very good. It's about 30 minutes. It's well worth it. Um, I have a list of all of the forms that have changed. When it's over, I'll give them to you. They're already in your dot loop. They're already in your zip forms. One of the things I will say is don't be scared of them. I was really super excited to hear that there was a short form, and I went to show property a couple of days ago, and I went ahead and printed this short form out, right? Anything and everything we do it good and better every time we practice it. So I took this short form with me. It was already filled out with my information. Does not talk about money. It does not talk about commissions. It basically says, I'm going to represent you for this long or on this piece of property, which is really nice. Had no problem getting it signed. Now, I did notice I do show a lot of properties in Austin, and I scheduled to show a piece of property off of Lake. It was near Lake Travis, but it wasn't on Lake Travis. And that agent asked me for the short form before she allowed me to show the property. So I know that that might be an issue. These are people that I knew that were really close to me. And I just sent it in dot loop and had them sign it. And then I was able to get permission to show the property. I think we're going to see a lot of that. So that's why I think this short form that's very easy to discuss with your buyers is going to be something that benefits you. So we're going to do a split screen. Watch this video together. You guys turn off your cameras. It's easier if you guys want to mute yourself so there's no back noise. And then afterwards, we'll go through the forms. I already have them saved, and I'll give you a list of all the new forms, and then we can go over any questions you guys might have. Look, we're going to have to wait just a second because our famous broker just logged in late. That is recorded. Waiting for him to connect. Hey, Rick, just in time. We're getting ready to watch the Texas Realtors Form update video together on a split screen. And then afterwards, we're going to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 forms that have changed or been added. We just shortly discussed the importance of the short form and how I'm really excited about that because it is not intimidating to our buyers. And so we're going to watch this quick video together, and then afterwards we're going to go through the forms real quick and see if anybody has any questions. When sharing my screen, occasionally you can't hear or it's slow. If you have any issues, somebody send me a quick text message or send me a message in the chat. All that look good?
With Texas Realtors.
Today, we're going to walk through many of the changes coming next week to the Texas Realtors forms. First, let me get the preliminaries out of vendors. We'll have these updated. We're going to walk through many of the changes coming next week to the Texas Realtors forms. First, let me get the preliminaries out of the way. We are recording this webinar and it will be posted on our website for future viewing. We are not answering questions today, but please ask your questions in the Q&A field, and we will review those questions. We will post FAQs for all questions received, and be sure to check back to texasrealestate.com for the video, for FAQs, other videos, and other updates as well. Moving to slide 2, let's talk a little bit about the background, why we're having this webinar today, why we are changing our forms at this time. So the reason for the forms change. On March 15th, of this year, NAR announced a settlement agreement in the Sitzer-Burnett case. This was a class action antitrust lawsuit brought back in 2019 by home sellers in Missouri who claimed that broker commissions were inflated based on the MLS offer of cooperative compensation. If you recall, a jury found NAR and the other defendants liable, at which point in time numerous copycat lawsuits were filed across the country, including here in Texas. NAR and the other defendants have agreed to settle this lawsuit. This settlement includes numerous parties, associations, MLSs, and members, and requires NAR to make changes to its MLS rules and change the way buyer broker compensation is paid in real estate transactions. The court has granted preliminary approval of the settlement, which started the clock ticking for parties to file necessary paperwork and for associations and MLSs to change their rules and forms. While the court has set November 26, 2024 as the date to hold a hearing regarding final approval of the settlement, August 17th is the date by which the MLSs must update their rules regarding buyer broker compensation. In May, NAR updated the MLS rules to bring MLSs in compliance with the terms of the settlement agreement. Your local MLS will be making these changes by August 17th. MLS rules now include requirements for disclosures and written agreements, which is what the settlement agreement requires. I'm going to briefly review those here so that you know the why behind our forms update. First of all, listing brokers must disclose to sellers and obtain seller approval for any payment or offer of payment that the listing broker or seller will make to another broker acting for buyers. This disclosure must be in writing and provided in advance of any payment or agreement to pay, and must specify the amount or rate of any such payment. MLS participants must disclose to sellers and buyers that broker commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. This disclosure must be contained in listing agreements and buyer representation agreements. MLS participants working with a buyer must have a written agreement before the buyer tours any home. So let's break down that requirement just a little bit. Working with a buyer, what does that mean? This is basically any agent who is not considered to be working with a seller. While no agreement would be required by a listing agent holding an open house, or by a listing agent providing an unrepresented buyer access to a house they have listed, a written agreement would be required for any agent not working on behalf of the seller that opens that home for the buyer. Touring a home means when the buyer and the MLS participant enter the house. This includes when the MLS participant enters the home to provide a live virtual tour to a buyer, even if that buyer is not physically present. Now, while the settlement agreement and the MLS rules may use the word tour or touring, we say showing. So anytime we talk about a showing of a home, we're talking about touring for purposes of the settlement agreement. And then home means a residential property consisting of not less than one nor more than 4 residential dwelling units. So that is in line with our TREC residential 1 to 4 family contracts. The settlement also requires the written agreement with the buyer to contain 3 specific provisions. They are: the agreement must disclose the amount or rate of compensation the realtor will receive and how this amount will be determined. The amount of compensation reflected in the agreement must be objectively ascertainable and may not be open-ended. For example, it can't say compensation will be whatever amount the seller is offering. And finally, the realtor may not receive compensation for brokerage services from any source that exceeds the amount or rate agreed to in that agreement. So lots of changes coming to the representation agreement. On the next slide, I just want to highlight the work that we have done and are doing. We have provided representation forms to our members for many years. As a result of this settlement, we needed to update many forms and create new ones. A broker residential forms task force was created, including brokers representing different size firms and geography. This task force met in person over a few months and updated 16 forms and added 3 new ones. Now, what is the timeline that we're working under here? And where can you find the forms? Red lines of the forms are posted right now on the Adopted Forms page of the Texas Realtors website. The forms will be available on June 24th in zip forms and all other Texas Realtors forms providers. You'll be able to download them from our website as well as access them through zip forms or any licensed forms provider. The updated forms replace the previous versions, so all members will be using the updated forms moving forward. You are required to use the updated forms once they are posted on June 24th. The updated and new forms can be used prior to your MLS updating its rules and fields to comply with the MLS rules. You can still adhere to the current MLS rule regarding cooperative compensation offered on the MLS even while using our updated form. So we're going to have our forms out there. They're ready to be used. They can be used even if your MLS has not yet updated its rules and removed cooperative compensation, which they will do by August 17th. So here's a question that we receive many times. We've received it already. What if your client signed a representation agreement, whether a listing agreement or a buyer's rep agreement, on the previous pre-June 24 version, one that does not meet the requirements of the settlement? Do you need to have them sign a new agreement? Here's the answer. If your client signed a pre-June 24 representation agreement with you, and that client has entered into a sales contract to purchase or sell a home prior to August 17th, you do not need to update your representation agreement. On the other hand, if your client signed a pre-June 24th representation agreement with you, and that client has not entered into a sales contract to purchase or sell a home prior to August 17th, those representation agreements will need to be updated. One option is to enter into a new post-June 24th agreement. The easier option is to use a new form that we just created. It's on the screen. TXR 2701 Amendment to Representation Agreement. This form can be used with both listing and buyer-tenant representation agreements to allow brokers under a current representation agreement, a pre-June 24th representation agreement, to meet the requirements of the NAR settlement. It includes the required disclosures and authorizations that are required beginning August 17th, and that is all it does. It brings our current pre-June 24th agreements in line with the August 17th requirements. This form is temporary and will be pulled down at the appropriate time. It's being provided as an easy button for compliance with the new rules. So now we're going to talk about some of the other updates and new forms. We don't have time to hit all forms today, so we are highlighting the ones that have the most impact. And I'll turn it over to David to get us started.
Okay, thank you, Lori. Let's talk about the listing agreements. So we have several listing agreements that are impacted by these changes. We've got 1101, which is our residential real estate listing agreement, exclusive right to sell. 1102, residential real estate listing agreement, exclusive right to lease. And 1201, the farm and ranch real estate listing agreement, exclusive right to sell. And we have made pretty much identical changes to all three of these listing agreements. So first up is paragraph 5. That is the broker compensation paragraph. We added the required disclosure that broker compensation is not set by law and is fully negotiable. We separated the broker's fee into two options. The seller and broker can negotiate whether the seller will pay the listing broker an amount that includes compensation to a buyer's broker, as paragraph 5A. The listing broker would be responsible for paying the buyer's broker from their fee. That's similar to how compensation on the MLS works currently. Or the seller will pay the listing broker only. That is option 5B. In the current listing agreement, you could accomplish the same result by inserting 0 into the buyer's broker compensation paragraph. But by having these separate paragraphs A and B, we feel it adds tremendously to the transparency that compensating the buyer's broker is optional for the seller. Currently, compensation to a buyer's broker is contained in paragraph 8. We move the cooperative compensation provisions to paragraph 5, where the broker's fee is inserted. We felt that the broker's fee and compensation to a buyer's broker should be discussed with the client at the same time. It only makes sense that these two provisions be in the same place. We also removed references to MLS participants versus non-MLS participants, since compensation will no longer be permitted on an MLS at all. Currently, paragraph 8, or the new version of paragraph 8, has the word reserved now. It's just a placeholder. We did not want to have to renumber all the remaining paragraphs once we remove the cooperative compensation provisions from 8 and moved them up to paragraph 5. And because the practice of sharing commission is changing, we added a note to inform the seller that a buyer may ask for seller to contribute an amount towards buyer's expenses, including broker fees or other closing costs. And we refer you to paragraph 11. In paragraph 11, we added a new subparagraph F to allow the seller to authorize the listing broker to share that the seller will consider contributing an amount towards buyer's expenses. Note that checking does authorize here does not obligate the seller to pay any specific amount. The seller still has sole discretion to negotiate payment of buyer's expenses with the buyer once offers start coming in. We added these changes because the removal of the MLS offer of compensation, where you currently communicate about payment of buyer's broker commission, means that buyers may be asking sellers to pay their buyer broker fees directly now. As a listing agent, you need to have that conversation with your seller. One common question we are getting: what goes in the blank lines for paragraph 5A1B and 5B1B? The blank space allows for other compensation arrangements that are different than the percentage and the flat fee that are already included. Other compensation arrangement could include a variable rate that the listing broker might charge. Parties can check either A or B or both, depending on their current compensation structure. And now I will turn it back over to Lori to get into sort of some of the addendum attached to listing agreements.
So on our next slide, you will see TXR 1412. We just talked about seller considering an amount to contribute toward buyer's closing costs, including compensation for a buyer's broker. So how do you navigate that once that conversation occurs? You can use seller's authorization to disclose and advertise certain information, TXR 1412. This form is not new. It was originally designed to be used as written authorization from the seller that the listing agent may disclose and or advertise certain information to prospective buyers, other brokers, and on the MLS. It can still be used for that purpose. We've updated it to make it clearer and intend for you all to use this as it was originally drafted to authorize the listing agent to disclose or advertise, for example, information regarding amounts seller would consider contributing toward buyer's expenses. Some MLSs may be adding a concessions field. Brokers can get seller's authorization to include a specific dollar amount in an MLS. This will obviously be subject to local MLS rules. So that is not a new form, but it may have a lot more importance for you now that these discussions are taking place off of the MLS. On the next slide, we have TXR 1404, which is the amendment to listing. We updated this form to provide specific provisions to amend the broker's fees paragraph in 1101 and 1201. This is where the seller and listing broker can agree to change the amount seller will pay the listing broker and or the amount, if any, listing broker will share with the buyer's broker. We added the required disclosure that broker compensation is not set by law and is fully negotiable. If you need to amend an older version of 1101, 1102, 1201, or 1201, a pre-June 24th version of those, you can use this new updated 1404. Use the catch-all paragraph on the amendment, and that's paragraph F at the bottom, if the specific paragraph in the listing agreement is no longer listed in the amendment. So there have been some changes that would impact how you normally use this form, but you can still use it going forward. Alternatively to updating a pre-June 24th listing agreement with this 1404, you can also execute a new version of the applicable listing agreement. And don't forget, we have 2701, the form to allow you to update your listing agreements to come into compliance with the new requirements. On the next slide, we have TXR 1417 representation disclosure. This form has actually been around for many years. Currently, a broker or their agent may use this form to inform another party to a transaction or another license holder who represents another party to a transaction who the broker represents. This is a TREC requirement, although the information can be conveyed in writing or verbally. So use of this form has not been necessary and may not have been commonplace. We've updated this form so that now you can continue to use it as you were to comply with the TREC requirement of disclosure of who you represent, but also now to disclose to a consumer that the listing broker represents the seller of the residential property to be shown. We did this because a listing broker does not need a written agreement to provide access to an unrepresented buyer. And I'm talking about a listing broker or an agent in that listing firm. Other agents, non-listing firm agents, do now need a written agreement to show that home to a potential buyer. Now that there is a requirement for that agent working with the buyer to secure a written agreement with that buyer to show the home, a listing broker could now use this form to confirm to the buyer that the agent is working on behalf of the seller. It's a little bit confusing, but our goal here, as requested by brokers, was to have a document that the listing firm, an agent with the listing firm, can show to that buyer to ensure that the buyer understands that that agent represents the seller and is not acting on behalf of the buyer. They're acting on behalf of the seller when they show them that home. So with that, we're going to move on to buyer representation agreements, and I will turn it over to David.
Okay, so first up, let's talk about 1501, the Residential Buyer Tenant Representation Agreement. It's got a new name. We added on the label long form. That's because in a minute you'll hear about a new form, the short form buyer rep. So just to distinguish the two forms, we added long form to this agreement. Broker compensation is moved to paragraph 7, which is now at the top of page 2, and the language is updated to ensure broker is authorized to receive compensation in compliance with the settlement agreement. We added the required limitation that the broker is prohibited from receiving compensation for broker services from any source that exceeds the amount stated in the agreement. This requirement means that brokers must ensure any compensation they expect to receive for their efforts is reflected in the buyer tenant representation agreement where the client has agreed to that compensation. We added the required disclosure that broker compensation is not set by law and is fully negotiable. On the next slide, now this is an important update. Just today, we modified provisions in this agreement related to bonuses and other compensation in 1501. After discussions with the NAR legal staff, Texas Realtors determined that the provisions related to bonuses and other compensation in our buyer tenant agreement did not satisfy the objectively ascertainable requirement in the NAR settlement. We understand that many of you have already taken a class on the updated forms and may have seen the previous version where there were blank lines for bonuses and other compensation, and we had to remove those lines. We would not have made this change at this time if we didn't feel it was absolutely necessary to protect our members and the association. So what we've done, we amended the language regarding bonuses and other compensation to make sure it is in compliance with the settlement. All compensation to a broker must be objectively ascertainable in this agreement. Therefore, we remove those blank lines and we included a note here in the representation agreement that the buyer will understand that a bonus or other compensation may be offered to the buyer's broker. And once your buyer is ready to submit an offer to purchase or lease a property for which there is a bonus or other compensation offered to you as a buyer's broker, you will need to use the amendment TXR 1505 to allow the buyer to authorize your receipt of that compensation. And we will check out 1505 in just a minute. On the next slide is our new form. TXR 1507 is Residential Buyer Tenant Representation Agreement short form. Okay, this came from an overwhelming member request. They wanted a more basic, much shorter buyer tenant representation agreement. This form is essentially two forms in one. It can be used to provide full services to a client, where the broker assists the client in locating a property all the way to sitting down at the closing table. But it can also be used to provide showing services. Remember, the MLS changes require, if you're working with the buyer, you're not the listing broker. If you're working with the buyer, you have to get a written agreement with the buyer prior to touring a home. So again, we use the word showing here in Texas. So it's showing services where the broker agrees to only provide access to show property. The form includes the necessary provisions to comply with the recent NAR policy changes, but it has the flexibility to work with buyers and tenants that may not be ready to commit to a long-term relationship with an agent. The term or the duration of the agreement can be as short as 1 day, and the market area that the agreement applies to can be one property address. So this agreement has a lot of flexibility. A question that we're getting: what are my duties and responsibility if my client selects showing services on the buyer tenant representation agreement? Well, under the occupation code, license holders are required at minimum to answer the party's questions and present any offer to or from the party. This simply means that the agent is required to give the offer to the intended party. This requirement does not also require the agent to sit down and write out the offer or negotiate the terms for the buyer and seller. It's intended to make sure that the agent is not withholding any information, any material information. So if a client has an offer that they want you to give, yes, you would have to give it. If you receive an offer, you would have to then pass that offer along. Brokers are permitted under the law to agree on which services the broker will provide to their clients. For example, there are already limited services listing brokers, and there are referral agents that have agreed to provide only certain services to their clients. These brokers would still have to perform these services while meeting their legal and ethical duties. So on the next slide, we have the amendment. 1505, Amendment to Buyer Tenant Representation Agreement. We updated this form to include a specific paragraph to amend the broker obligation paragraph in the short form 1507. This is where, when you want to move from, let's say you start off initially with offering showing services with your client, but now the client is ready to use you to actually move forward and purchase, you can amend the agreement from showing services to full services. We've updated this form to specify changes to the broker's fee paragraph in both 1501 and 1507. Because of the limitation of the new policies that brokers prohibited from receiving compensation that exceeds the amount stated in the agreement, it was important to add the ability to amend the agreement if additional compensation is available and if the client and the broker agree to that additional compensation. This form now includes a separate paragraph to add that the client authorizes the broker to receive a bonus or other compensation. This will be more important now that as a buyer's broker, all compensation for brokerage services you receive has to be objectively ascertainable in the written agreement and has to be authorized by your client. So use this amendment to add compensation you're being offered if it's not included in the buyer representation agreement when signed. Note that a specific dollar amount is required, and that is the only thing that should be entered in the blank. This should be done both under the long and short versions of the buyer's representation agreement. So another question we get: if my buyer initially agrees to showing services, but now wants me to submit an offer, do I have to amend the agreement? Well, yes, you do. Under the showing services option, the broker has only agreed to provide access to property within the market area. The parties can amend the short form to select the full services option. Also use 1505, the amendment to buyer tenant representation agreement, for that. The party should also determine if intermediary authorization is needed and what the broker's fee should be going forward if you previously only entered a showing services fee arrangement. But if you're now going to provide full services, you may also need to update the broker's fee. So you can amend that agreement, the short form showing services, but alternatively, the parties can choose to execute 1501, the long form, to switch over to providing the full range of services. If you need to amend an older version of 1501, the pre-June 24th version, you can use the new version of the amendment 1505 to do that. So just use the catch-all paragraph on the amendment if the specific paragraph in the buyer tenant representation agreement isn't available because we changed some paragraph numbers. Again, alternatively, you can also execute a new version of the applicable buyer tenant agreement. And with that, I will turn things over to Lori to talk about the compensation agreements.
Thank you, David. So along with the listing agreements, the buyer and tenant representation agreements, the other big area that we wanted to hit on today were compensation agreements. All of the changes coming for the MLS rules update is surrounding compensation to brokers. So we have a new form that we created, TXR 2406, Addendum Regarding Broker Compensation. This addendum is designed to be used as an addendum to the TREC residential contracts, except for farm and ranch. This will not be used to amend farm and ranch. That contract already has provisions in it related to compensation. But all other TREC residential contracts, you can use this addendum to add payment of buyer's broker's fees, including from a seller. Now that the MLS rules are changing, that there will no longer be offers of compensation from a listing broker to a buyer's broker on the MLS, we think this addendum will be useful to negotiate a fee from the seller to the listing broker directly, to the buyer's broker directly. I knew I was going to mess that up at least one time. This addendum refers back to other written representation agreements, 1101, 1501, or 2301 or 2, which I'll mention in a moment. If a compensation agreement, such as 2401 or 2402, has been entered into, be sure to check that box on this form. I said 23, I meant 2401 and 2402 as far as our compensation agreements. These used to be called registration agreements. If no compensation agreement is in place, and now the seller will pay the buyer's broker directly, D2B can be used to specify the amount and authorize that payment. Use this box only when seller has agreed through contract negotiations with the buyer to pay for part or all of the buyer's broker's compensation, and that is not otherwise addressed in a separate compensation agreement. And remember, if 2406 is used to reflect that a seller is paying buyer broker compensation, a buyer's broker will need to amend their buyer's representation agreement with their buyer because the buyer needs to authorize that the broker can receive that compensation amount. Remember, on the representation agreement, the buyer's rep agreement, it's all compensation received from any source. The buyer has to authorize that in writing. As a reminder, and since I did mess up the numbers a moment ago, TXR 2401 is the compensation agreement between broker and owner. It has an updated name from registration to compensation. And TXR 2402 is the compensation agreement between brokers, also replacing the term registration with compensation, just for clarity. We did add language in those two forms stating that the agreement supersedes all prior agreements between the parties. We hope that you will use these for clarification, not for confusion. So these agreements supersede all prior agreements. In 2402, that's the compensation agreement between brokers. This is important. The cooperating broker's entitlement to compensation is based on procuring cause. Procuring cause was the standard for compensation under NAR MLS rules. Without compensation on an MLS, we felt it was important to maintain the familiar standard of procuring cause in the broker-to-broker compensation agreement. This protects the buyer's agent. If their efforts lead to a successful transaction, they deserve to be compensated. It also protects the listing broker. They only have to pay the procuring cause broker. So in multiple offer situations, listing brokers are free to sign more than one compensation agreement with multiple buyers brokers with the confidence they will only have to compensate the one broker that is the procuring cause of that sale. So David, I'm going to turn it back to you at this point.
Sure. So the next slide, we have the referral agreement between brokers. Just a couple of updates on this one. So we did add a new paragraph to clarify the term of the agreement so that you can enter an end time and end date. And we also added a new paragraph to specify whether this agreement is for one transaction or multiple transaction. We had several questions about that. If you refer a buyer and then that buyer buys multiple properties during the term of the referral agreement, does that broker owe a referral for multiple transactions that buyer purchased or just the one? So now that becomes a negotiable term in the referral agreement between brokers. Lori, why don't you lead us home?
All right. We thought this might take longer, but we are about to wrap up. In conclusion, on June 24th, all forms vendors will have these updated and new forms posted for your use. The previous versions will be taken down at that point. You can use these updated and new forms even if your MLS has not removed cooperative compensation from the MLS yet. They will still work under the current model of cooperative compensation on the MLS. Use the new TXR 2701 beginning August 17th to update any representation agreements that are on pre-June 24th versions to ensure compliance with the new requirements. I hope you see what we did there. We know all MLSs will update their rules and practices and fields by August 17th, but you all will have the new versions beginning June 24th. So we hope that it is a smaller number of clients for which you have to update current representation agreements. But if you do, TXR 2701 is there for you. I do want to note here that the TREC contracts are not changing at this time. They may be updated later. Their broker lawyer committee is hard at work looking at potential changes. The earliest any TREC contracts would be updated would be January 1. And then I also want to leave you with that last statement that all compensation for brokerage services you will receive needs to be clear and authorized by your client. That is one of the main points of these changes. We have updated these forms and added new ones so that you can be transparent have conversations with your clients about how compensation may work in that particular transaction, and be sure to document and get authorization for all compensation received in any transaction. As I said before, this has been reported and we will post it. We will continue to update FAQs based on questions we received today. And if at any time you have questions about these new forms and updated forms, you can call the hotline, 512-480-8200. Don't everybody call at once right now. We don't have that much capacity, but that is there for your use, and we hope that you will use it. Thank you so much. We appreciate you listening to this update today.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. So that is a lot of information. You can unmute yourself, find out what's going on here. There we go. It went to another screen, and I apologize. But that is a lot of information. A couple of things if you want to get your notepad out. And this is what I did. I don't know what will work for you, but I went through the entire list and I printed the ones that were most important to my business. Yours may be different, and I kind of went through them. It took me 30 minutes and I mind role played, which if I'm going to meet a buyer, how would I, read the form, because when we get in front of a buyer or we get ready to write an offer, we've done it so long and so many times that it's like check, 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 input, check, check. I mean, it's that simple, right? We have it memorized. We haven't read them in a long time. And so form 1404, 1402, 1417, 1507, 2406, 1505, 2401, 2402, 2701, 1501, 2405, and 1412. Most of them are all new. A handful are updated. The short form. I love the short form. It's 1507. Like I mentioned right before we started, I've already started to use that. I have it pretty much memorized. In my particular business, I'm going to present that to every buyer, period, when a showing is requested. Either they're in person or like I had to do in Austin, in order to even get an appointment, I needed to show the short form. And then as I work with the buyer and I write an offer, then when the offer comes in, I'm going to change to the long form or the 1505, amending anything based on the offer. So feedback, you guys, that was a lot of information.
Shauna, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Tiny Dancer. That's our broker, by the way. I recognize his voice. What is your feedback, Rick? It's definitely not as scary as we thought, right?
Nah, a lot of this stuff, it's self-explanatory as soon as you pull the contract out and read it. I think that everybody wants a class and wants to make sure that they're caught up. And to me, the best way to do that is to read the form, use the form. I get why we had to make changes on the grand scheme of things, but everything has always been negotiable. So I think we're good, and I think everybody's going to have success using this stuff. And I don't believe anybody, but maybe Devin, is going to have a hard time with this stuff.
You're gonna get it, Devin. It's not that hard. It's really not that hard.
Devin, you got this.
I love that. So I saw a listing yesterday from our office. It was a price reduction. If I quote something incorrectly, somebody correct me, but it was a price reduction and a $2,000 bonus to the selling agent. So there's a form that allows us, I believe it was 1412. Again, there's a lot of form changes, but I believe it was 1412 that we get our seller to sign that allows us to advertise. So even though we cannot put 3% in the MLS, 2% in the MLS, $2,000 bonus, if we have that form signed, we can put it everywhere else. We can put it in special provisions. We can put it anywhere. If somebody's going to pay you a steak dinner because you sold their home, we can put that. We can use that for advertising to the buyer's agents when you have the listing.
Hey, just so you guys are aware, companies like Zillow and Homes.com, I've been calling these companies and asking them what their platform is going to allow us to do. And their response was if there's an area where you can modify a listing, which, you know, Zillow doesn't really allow for much. They don't care that if you advertise that or if you state that, you know, paying buyer's commission. You can even put it on the listing if you want to. You can upload a photo, send it to Zillow, and tell them to add it to your listing profile. Front picture of the house that says paying buyer's agent commission. So there's other things you can do to kind of help, you know, assist buyer's agents in understanding if they should show your house or not.
Awesome.
I have a question. So in the MLS, we can put verbiage for third party sources, but not on the MLS. You know what I'm talking about when we're entering in our listings, and you can put it stuff just for third party sites.
Oh, like the
comments.
description and stuff like that.
So are we allowed to put it in there because it's not gonna be in the MLS, it's gonna be syndicated to a third party?
As long as you have your seller sign that you're allowed to advertise that.
Okay,
I
because
believe that's 1412.
because then people on Zillow will automatically see it. The description will just be different because we can say 3% buyer agent compensation or whatever. But in the MLS, we can't put that, correct?
Correct.
Am I right? You know?
Correct.
Okay, so I'm good then.
So we can put it in third-party comments.
So yeah, there's a part where it says, there's a part where it's just for the MLS, and then there's a part for third-party sites.
Where is that at?
It's when you're entering it into the MLS, I just have to go through it in my mind. Like, I always leave it blank because usually I leave it blank because it's just gonna grab what our MLS says. But there's a spot where we can actually put it for third parties.
At the
Are you
bottom,
talking about CTX MLS?
I'm on the CTX and, well, I'm on Austin MLS too.
That's probably gonna be something for ABOR MLS, not for their MLS over there, not C. We just entered a listing.
That's, I mean, that's all more of a reason for us to join the Austin board if it's allowing us to do that, because it's gonna syndicate to Zillow and stuff. Why, you know what I mean?
Workies.
I'll look on the CTX.
It's not in CTX.
That's only a Austin.
I'm just starting to.
I just.
Yeah, that's just an Austin thing. It's not CTX MLS.
I've never.
use your school.
That little guy had been studying for a whole week and just passed his real estate exam.
That's my assistant, by the way. He is getting a new bubble toy from Walmart because he has been so good while Nani has worked this 1 hour. So when we get done here, we're definitely going to be blowing bubbles. So yes, if it allows you to do that, you can do that. But also, if you have the form filled out, you can still advertise that in your provisions. So let's just take out the word commission altogether, and the seller wants you to advertise that they're willing to give you a home warranty. Right? That's something that's typically negotiated. A home warranty is typically negotiated, but this particular seller says, get my house sold, let them know I will pay for a home warranty. Let them know I will pay for a new survey. let them know that I will pay whatever. It doesn't have to be commission. You can use all of that to attract your buyer or your buyer's agent. It's no different than commission.
Well, but Ray can just take them and put them on the board.
So did that answer your question?
Mine? Yes.
Yes, awesome. One other thing I wanted to touch on, how many of you are associated with Xiaomi? I think that's how you say it. I gotta go look at my app. It's a showing platform where you get a text message that says, say, show my house and I'll pay you $50. Yeah, it's Xiaomi, SHOWAMI. So I
was
am.
kind of hoping I would be the only one that knows.
Oh, sorry about your luck, my friend.
I know, it's just like
So nobody, we don't have to talk about it if it's not huge here, if you guys aren't using Xiaomi. No? Spencer, you're the only one using Xiaomi?
No,
So
I haven't.
I've used it too. Do we
Not
still
know that
need to get that
represents
buyer rep agreement, even though we're not representing them, we're just opening a door?
Okay, so I don't have the answer to that yet, and that's why I brought it up. There's two things that are in discussion right now with Xiaomi. Number one, we're paid, right? We're paid $35, or we have to pay to get somebody else to open the house. I never, ever, ever ask for people to open the house for me unless I'm in an area that I don't have access to the MLS, and I let them know I just need somebody to open the door. See you, bye. I will be there. So they're asking us to show our buyer's rep agreement to Xiaomi before they hire somebody to open the door. So they're just opening the door. They're supposed to be just opening the door. I had somebody open the door for me. I was there representing my buyers, and that guy tried to sell his mortgage to my buyers. So red flag. Try and always use it if you're, like Highland Lakes. So not everybody's a member of Highland Lakes MLS because it's our neighbor. It's right there. They should be in Central Texas and vice versa. So if you're trying to show in Highland Lakes and you can't use your Supra, then you might want to have a Highland Lakes agent open the door for you. My suggestion is to go because they're going to take your buyers. Xiaomi wants a buyer's rep agreement, or they haven't implemented it yet, but they may want a buyer's rep agreement before they have a door open. That's the one red flag I've seen with Xiaomi so far. The second one is they have this big, huge discussion right now. So Spencer says he's using it. He's going to open a house for me and I'm going to pay him $35 for opening the house, right? How are you paying your broker?
I'll take 50 and then we'll
Okay. Well, just because you're the tiniest answer and I feel sorry for you, I'm going to bump it up to 100. But you have an agreement with your broker to pay him a percentage of your commissions. How are you paying your broker out of that $100?
I don't know. That's a good question. Rick?
Yeah.
Rick?
And the tiny dancer's on mute, so we can't even hear him.
Yeah, you have to have a separate agreement. Technically, everything is supposed to go through the brokerage, and so that's my advice: is before you start doing something like that, have a separate agreement with your broker in writing. I was shown in Houston this weekend, and going through the HAR app on my phone, it asked me, "Do you have a buyer's rep agreement with your client?" Before I could even schedule the showing. I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, I don't, but I hit yes just so that I could show the house. But another thing had come from that is before I decided to go down there and show the buyer the properties, the broker from HAR told me the way they do things down there is they'll show the house for you. If you send them your buyer's rep agreement, they'll show you the house. They'll show the house for your client, and they charge you 1%. And so you can go through that showing service, like Shauna was talking about. But yeah, I wonder if that's going to be a thing here. I have not heard anything, but yeah, definitely going to request a showing, it asked me if I had a buyer's rep agreement with my client. It wouldn't let me continue until I clicked yes.
So Rick, before you logged on earlier, we were just talking about that. I had to show a piece of property in Austin and off of Lake Travis. And before she would give me showing instructions, before she would give me the combo, I had to show a buyer's rep agreement.
Yeah.
And I used the short form. No money, no disclosure, just that I'm going to show this piece of property and my buyer signed it. I don't like it. I don't like it. I'm going to have to do it. But I just gave my buyers of a $1.4 million house, the sellers, I just gave the seller's agent my buyer's names.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's just building that relationship with our buyers. And I'm on this broker's feed on Facebook. I'm sure we all have all of these, but this one I love. It's I don't know how I got a member because I'm not a broker, but they love me. So and one of the comments that they made is it is going to force us to become more professional. It's going to force us to have those difficult conversations that we think are difficult. I mean, this is the largest financial decision our buyers are going to make. So it should not be a difficult subject to bring up. But it also is going to weed out the guys and the girls who are just looking for decorating ideas, who are not approved, who are not, I think it's going to give us more time to deal with the people that really matter. Rick's thinking, what the heck did she just say?
No, I agree with it. No, I mean, things are going to change, and I really believe that everybody is going to kind of modify the way they do business with it, and stay legal. And I really don't think I've had a couple of people ask me, are we going to do a class on this? And I've seen some other companies put together, big classes, but the reality of it is that we're movers. Everybody's here doing their business, and if you're really, really stressed out about this, go ahead and open up the form and read it. You'll see that there's nothing to it. I didn't even realize that the listing agreement had changes to it, and I had just done a listing agreement, and I thought, man, I whipped through that thing so fast I didn't even think about it, and there was nothing there that caught me off guard. But we'll keep talking about this. I think my hesitation as the broker for sitting down and really digging into this is that now a lot of the feedback that I'm getting from like Becky Whittier from Trek, and Becky Whittier is the CEO of our MLS, and just other input that I'm getting is, hey, don't do anything yet. We're not even sure this thing is going to kick off on the 17th of August like everybody's anticipating, because now there's 8 appeals. So it's good that we're being prepared. It's good that we're seeing these classes. I don't want to say it's business as usual, because regardless of anything, it's not. But just, study your craft, and be prepared. And if you have questions, it's okay to call me, though I'd prefer if you called Shauna. That was a joke, Shauna.
No, you can. And I was actually I know previously somebody was having trouble logging in, and I was like, do y'all have her cell phone number? I'm going to put my cell phone number in the chat. You can always message me if you have any questions. First disclaimer, I don't know everything, but if I know it, I'm going to help you. If I don't, I'm going to research it and I'm going to find out before I tell you anything. And so just been doing it a long time, seen a lot of things in the life of real estate, just as you. And so you can reach out to me. I would love to learn from you. And if you can learn from me, I'm here. I'm available. So don't hesitate to reach out. If you print the forms off and you do your little mind role play, like I said, it only takes about 30 minutes, and you've got a question because the wording is weird. I love contracts. It's one of my expertise. I get them. Text me. Hey, what would you put here? Why, I don't mind helping at all. I'm here to help. So don't hesitate to reach out to me. And Spencer, I haven't gotten your text message yet about real estate boosters. You better start looking at your calendar, because I'm gonna hound you until you tell me to stop. Any other questions, you guys? Oh, one last thing. Do you like this on Zoom rather than me coming to the office? Is this good?
Yeah, personally for me it is. For me,
I
it
know.
isn't.
You're definitely going to get more attendance.
I don't know. I'm really sad because our table's full over there and I'm not there. Like y'all, I'm hugging you. Can you feel it? I
I
know.
love that though. I love that.
So I love that y'all came into the office, but we'll offer Zoom. I will still try and come in every once in a while so we can do face to face because I really like to do that. But we'll continue to offer Zoom. So if you have anything else, you can text me, message me. Everybody has a super great day.
Yeah, 13 people. I hope you guys were okay with me not being there. Is everybody all right?
We'll get over it.
Okay.
I saw that. I saw that, Miss Schaefer. I saw that. Dave, your wife is crazy.
You're telling me, Rick?
All right, good deal, good deal.